Hey guys, this video is going to be a really brief introduction to photosynthesis, which is the process that plants use to convert sunlight into chemical energy in the forms of sugars. It's actually something we as animals cannot do. Because plants don't actually have to hunt their food and eat, they're called autotrophs, meaning that they automatically make their own food just as long as it's sunny outside. This is also why you don't see plants up and walking around, because they just need sunlight to make their own sugars as a food source. They don't need to be mobile because they have no need to hunt anything down or gather their own food. So that's why, plants are rooted to the ground because they don't actually need to be walking around. So I'm going to go into briefly what exactly makes a plant cell different from an animal cell. So what's in a plant cell? Well, for the most part, they are eukaryotic, meaning that they have a nucleus. Just a reminder that plants and animals and fungi are all eukaryotic, and just be careful, prokaryotes are going to be like bacteria. They do not have a nucleus, but plants do, and that's why they're eukaryotes. Here's your nucleus. They also have an endomembrane system, just like we do. Review of that. So they do have a nucleus, which holds the DNA. They have a smooth and rough ER, which both are in charge of making materials. Rough has ribosomes. And then you have your smooth ER, which is going to make your lipids. Those proteins and lipids will go to the Golgi to be modified before they're either used or leave that particular plant cell out of their cell membrane and cell wall. In addition to these organelles, a plant cell actually has energy organelles. So those are going to be both your mitochondria, which is here, which is going to break sugars down into ATP. And then you have this very special organelle, which we're going to focus on for photosynthesis. That's called the chloroplast. We as animals, we do not have this. You look at your skin, you're not going to see any green pigmentation because you don't have a chloroplast. You can't make your own food, which is why if you stop eating, you feel really tired. And if you don't eat for a really long time, you could possibly starve to death. So just know that plants have both mitochondria and chloroplasts are energy organelles. Just to tie a couple things back to biochemistry, I do want to point out that we have 4 major macromolecules that tie into our really important organelles that we talked about. Our nucleic acids, DNA, being inside of the nucleus. And then we have our proteins, which are made in the rough ER, our lipids, which are made in the smooth ER. And just you can tell that lipids and proteins are actually going to help make up the cell membrane. And then what we're missing, besides nucleic acids, proteins, and lipids, is carbohydrates. Well, where are those going to be made? In the chloroplast. The chloroplast is where our carbs are going to be made. In particular, we focus on the most important monosaccharide ever, which is glucose. So just a refresher, glucose is a monosaccharide, which means that it is a monomer and a building block for other carbohydrates or polysaccharides. So we focus on glucose a lot because it is made and thus strung together into more complex carbohydrates like starch and in animals as glycogen. So again, just trying to refresh on some old vocabulary. Glucose is going to be strung together with a dehydration reaction, which is how we take 2 monomers and put them together. And that's going to make, especially in plants, starch, which is why in a lot of our baking, if you make biscuits or cornbread, there you put corn starch into it, which is a complex carb or polysaccharide. But where is all this sugar coming from? The chloroplast. That's the only place it's made in the cell. And as a matter of fact, it's the only place that it's made in any organism. So we definitely rely on plants at the base of the food chain because they have the ability to make these sugars that we thus break down when we eat food, whether it be, I want to eat a strawberry, which is a plant, or if I want to eat some sort of chicken or maybe ground beef or something that animal has fed on plants at some point because they are the only organisms on Earth that can make sugars. Very important. So in this chloroplast, we have a couple areas. The stroma is hard to see because it's clear gel that the thylakoids, which are these like stacks, they almost look like stacks of green quarters. That is where the light reactions happen. And the stroma, the gel, is where the dark reactions happen, which we're going to get into in a different video. So just know that the thylakoids are where your light reactions occur, and your stroma is where those dark reactions are going to happen. But I will definitely make sure I mention that in the light reaction video. So I do want to take, lastly, to wrap this video up, a look at the reaction for photosynthesis. So photosynthesis, imagine like a solar panel absorbs energy from the sun to make electricity. Plants absorb energy from the sun to make sugars. So we'll see how light can really be used and manipulated to create sugars in the light reactions. But just to recap, back to our thermodynamics, this is an anabolic reaction. So think absorbing starts with an A, and so does anabolic. So we can kind of see that anabolic reactions take energy and store it and use it, and that is what is going to happen in photosynthesis. So we can start with our reactants, which are going to be on the left side of our chemical equation, and those are going to be carbon dioxide and water and sunlight. So these are the reactants. So that is what the plant is going to use to make a sugar. And what we're going to get is oxygen gas, which is waste because the plant actually breathes it out, doesn't keep it. And we're going to get a glucose molecule, which is C6H12O6. So these are our products. And in order for this to happen, this is what we like to call a redox reaction, meaning that on the reactant side, one of these molecules is going to lose electrons and donate them to the molecule that is going to gain electrons. In this case, carbon dioxide is going to be gaining energy and becoming this carbon-based sugar. So it is reduced and gains electrons throughout this series of reactions, whereas our water molecule is going to actually lose electrons and becomes oxygen in the process, and those electrons it loses goes into the carbon dioxide. So I'm going to write all of that I just said down. So I like to remember redox reaction stuff by oil rig, meaning that oxidation loses and reduction gains, just to help you not confuse that reduction is actually gaining electrons and not losing them. Even though reducing sounds like it's losing, it's actually the exact opposite. So just so you're not second guessing yourself, oil rig is a great way to not mix that up. So water is definitely going to be oxidized, meaning it loses its electrons in this reaction. So when light strikes water, it's going to split, and those electrons aren't just going to magically make their way to carbon dioxide. They're actually carried by a molecule called NADP+, which when it gains electrons becomes NADPH. So when water is split, it is going to release that oxygen gas, and then this H plus from the hydrogen, and these electrons are kind of released into the surrounding area, and then that NADP plus is going to gain those electrons and carry them to the carbon dioxide. So NADP plus has been reduced. So now our lovely NADPH is going to travel to the carbon dioxide, which is going to gain those electrons, which is exactly how we go from a very simple gaseous molecule of carbon dioxide to a very, very complex molecule of glucose, because this is a lot more complex than just a carbon dioxide. So in order to actually beef up our carbon dioxide into a sugar, it is going to gain those electrons, and NADPH is just kind of the carrier. It just takes the electrons from water and carries them to carbon dioxide and kind of quote unquote drops them off. So in this case, the electrons are going into the CO2, and carbon dioxide has been reduced because it has gained those electrons, and NADPH is actually going to be oxidized, meaning it's lost the electrons. Why did it lose them? It gave them to carbon dioxide. So it has lost the electrons. It is now NADP plus again, but that's okay because it's going to just travel back to where the light reactions are happening, or where water is being split by light. It's going to pick up more electrons, and it's just going to do this cycle again and again and again, helping reduce this carbon dioxide until it is finally going to become a sugar. So in this case, I just think of NADP plus as an electron carrier, which is exactly what it is. And in this reaction, because carbon dioxide is gaining all of this energy, right? So think electrons are kind of like energy. I think they start with an E, and so does energy. You're gaining electrons, you're gaining energy, and we're becoming more complex. So in this case, our reactants, or our carbon dioxide, has less potential energy than our final product, which is a sugar. Where did that energy come from? It came from electrons, which came from water, which was split by sunlight. So light is definitely driving this whole process here right at the very beginning. But I will elaborate on a lot of these points in the light reaction video, and go into more detail about how exactly this happens. How do the electrons make their way into the NADPH? So I'll just elaborate on that then.